My name is Walter Hayes, and this house has been the center of my world for over 4 decades. I can still picture the first time my late wife Evelyn and I walked through the empty frame of what would become our home. Bare wooden beams, the smell of fresh sawdust, and a future we could almost touch. Every nail, every brick, every corner here holds a story we built together. These days, however, it doesn't feel like my home anymore. It started subtly, almost invisibly. My daughter Claire moved in with her husband Darren 2 years after Evelyn passed away. She said she wanted to keep an eye on me, and at the time I believed her. Grief makes you trust too easily. Back then, her offer felt like a lifeline in a house that had grown too quiet, but lately the warmth has been replaced by a chill that no heater can drive away. The first signs were small. My favorite coffee mug disappeared from the kitchen shelf. Family photographs vanished from the mantel, replaced by generic frames filled with pictures of Claire, Darren and their son Max. Conversations shifted from how I was doing to what we should do with the property. This morning, I woke to the sound of knuckles rapping on my bedroom door at exactly 6 a.m., a routine Claire started months ago. Her voice floated through, half sweet, half sharp. "You awake in there, Dad?" I sat up slowly, my knees aching from the cold. Through the thin door, I caught her mutter something to herself on her way down the hall. "He's becoming such a burden." The words weren't loud, but they landed heavy. A burden, that's what I was now. In the kitchen, Darren was at the counter scrolling on his phone, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. The reflection of a real estate app glowed on the screen. Claire was rinsing her mug, speaking in that bright public voice she uses when she's pretending everything's fine. "You're up early," she said without looking at me. "Big day today." I didn't ask what she meant. I've learned that in this house, questions invite answers you don't want to hear. I poured myself black coffee, no sugar. Claire used to remember I liked 1 spoonful. She doesn't bother anymore. Finally, Darren set his phone down. "Claire and I have been talking," he began. "We think it might be time to make some changes around here." "Changes? This place is too much for you to manage." Claire jumped in. "We could downsize, get you somewhere safer, closer to a doctor, less work." I heard the unspoken words, "less you in our way." I looked between them and took another slow sip. "And what happens to the house?" Darren exchanged a quick glance with Claire. "We've been talking to a few buyers. The market's good right now." "The market?" They spoke about my home, the one I built with my own hands, as if it were just another piece of inventory to unload. I nodded, masking the way my jaw tightened. That's when I knew something with them had shifted permanently. What they didn't know, what they could never imagine, was that I've been keeping a secret of my own, and before long it will turn this house, and their plans for it, upside down. That afternoon, I retreated to my workshop in the garage, the only place in the house that still feels entirely mine. The familiar scent of oil and old wood greeted me as I flipped on the dim overhead light. My tools were lined up exactly as I'd left them months ago, dust gathering in the quiet. Against the back wall sat my old safe, the one Claire and Darren believe only holds birth certificates, tax records, and a few pieces of Evelyn's jewelry. They've never noticed the false back panel or the hidden compartment beyond it. I knelt down, my fingers finding the familiar groove. With a quiet click, the panel shifted, revealing the documents I've guarded for years, bank statements, legal papers, and one letter from Evelyn that I've never opened. She'd given it to me before she died, instructing me to keep it sealed until the right time. I've been tempted, but somehow I know that time hasn't come yet. Through the garage window, I saw Claire outside in the yard, pacing with her phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was too far away to catch the words, but I recognized the way she walked, head tilted, smile fixed. It was the same posture she used when she was trying to convince someone to see things her way. I closed the safe and ran my hand along the cool metal door. Evelyn had warned me years ago that money could change people, even family. You never know, Walt, who someone becomes when an inheritance is in the picture. She was right. God help me, she was right. Dinner that evening was quiet. Max talked about a school project, his legs swinging under the table as he explained how he wanted to build a model rocket. I listened, nodding, smiling in the right places. Claire's eyes, however, kept sliding toward Darren, as if they were waiting for the right moment to say something. When Max asked if I could help him with the rocket, Claire cut in before I could answer. "We'll see, honey. Grandpa's got a lot on his plate." I met Max's disappointed eyes and gave him a reassuring smile. We'll make time, I told him. His face lit up, and for a moment the heaviness in my chest eased. After dinner, I climbed the stairs to my bedroom. The floorboards creaked under my feet, the same ones I'd installed by hand more than 40 years ago. Every sound, every mark on the walls is a piece of my life here. And yet the people living under this roof now see it only as a transaction. They think I'm old. They think I'm slow. What they don't understand is that I've spent my entire life building things, and I've learned that the foundation always matters more than what's on the surface. And right now, they have no idea that I've already started laying the foundation for the end of their little plan. The next morning, the knock on my door came later than usual, 6:15 instead of 6 sharp. That alone told me Claire wasn't in a good mood. When she pushed the door open without waiting for a reply, her tone was flat. "Dad, can you watch Max today?" School's closed for some teacher conference. She didn't wait for me to answer, already halfway down the hall toward the kitchen. No good morning, no check to see if I'd had breakfast. I've stopped expecting those courtesies. They're like coins in a jar. When people stop putting them in, the silence they leave behind becomes deafening. A few minutes later, Max wandered in, still in his pajamas, hair sticking up in every direction. "Grandpa, can we work on the rocket today?" The hope in his voice was pure, unfiltered, the kind of hope only an 8-year-old can have. I smiled. "After breakfast," I told him. "Promise." We ate quietly, just the two of us, until Darren came in. He poured himself coffee without offering me any, that smug half-smile on his face again. "Got a showing today," he said almost casually. "A showing?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah, couples looking for something like this, big yard, quiet street, prime location." I stirred my oatmeal slowly. "And do they know the property isn't for sale?" "Not yet," he said, taking a long sip. Claire breezed in moments later, car keys in hand. "Darren, don't be late for that. Dad, we'll be back around 6. Dinner will be late, so figure something out for you and Max." Max frowned at that, but she didn't notice. She was already halfway out the door. When they left, the air in the house felt lighter. Max and I headed to the garage, and I pulled out some scrap wood I'd been saving. The smell of sawdust filled the space as we measured, cut, and sanded. The rhythm of hammering drowned out everything else for a while. Max chattered about his friends, his favorite science experiments, and how he wanted to see the ocean someday. "You will," I told him, "and when you do, you'll remember it for the rest of your life." Around noon, while Max was eating a sandwich, I opened the safe again, just the main compartment this time, enough to see that everything was still in place. Inside the velvet pouch sat Evelyn's engagement ring, the one Claire once asked to borrow for a party and never got. I'd lied, told her it was at the jeweler's for cleaning. In truth, I'd hidden it away because I knew this day, the day when sentiment would lose to greed, would come. By the time Claire and Darren returned that evening, Max and I had finished the rocket. Claire barely glanced at it. "Cute," she said, already scrolling through her phone. Darren muttered something about clutter in the garage as he walked past. Max's smile faltered. I put a hand on his shoulder. "We'll launch it tomorrow," I told him. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and thought about the years since Evelyn's passing. The silence, the shifting balance in this house, the subtle way my routines had been taken apart and rearranged to suit them. They've been circling the deed for months now, like sharks testing the water. But I've been in deeper waters before, and I know exactly how to swim. 3 months earlier, I'd overheard Claire in the living room, her voice lowered but urgent. Liquidating assets, timing the market. She didn't know I was in the hallway listening. I didn't interrupt. Instead, the next morning, I called my lawyer, an old friend who's been on my side for decades. That was the day the first outlines of my plan took shape. It wasn't about revenge. Not exactly. It was about correction, setting the balance back to where Evelyn and I had always intended it to be. This morning, over breakfast, I decided to test the waters. "An old buddy from my construction days is thinking of downsizing," I said casually, stirring my coffee. "He's got a little place out near the coast. Ocean view. Says he might sell it cheap." Claire perked up instantly. "Where?" "Just outside Monterey," I replied, feigning indifference. "Needs some work, but it's got potential." I saw the calculation flash in both their eyes. Monterey meant money, vacation rentals, weekend getaways, prime real estate. Claire leaned in, her tone syrupy. "That could be nice for you, Dad. Smaller place, sea air. You'd love it." I hid my smile behind the coffee cup. The bait was set. Later that afternoon, I took Max to the park. We sat on a bench near the pond, tossing bits of bread to the ducks. "Grandpa," he asked suddenly. "Why does Mom get mad when you talk about the house?" I paused. "Sometimes grown-ups think too much about money and forget about home," I said. He nodded slowly, as though he understood more than a child should. When we returned, Claire was at the dining table with a stack of papers. The moment she saw me, she shoved them into a drawer. "Just bills," she said quickly. I didn't press. Patience is a builder's best tool. You don't frame a roof before the foundation is set. That night, I wrote a short letter to my lawyer, nothing detailed, just a confirmation that the documents we'd prepared were still ready, and a request to set a date for a meeting. Before dawn, I slipped it into the outgoing mail. The next morning, Claire's knock returned to its usual punctual 6 a.m., her voice artificially bright. "Morning, Dad. Busy day today. We've got a surprise for you." I didn't ask what it was. I already had a good idea. The surprise turned out to be anything but pleasant. When I came downstairs for breakfast, Claire and Darren were already in the living room, papers spread neatly across the coffee table like they were preparing for a presentation. Claire wore her professional smile, the kind she used to rehearse in the bathroom mirror before job interviews. Darren leaned back in his chair, sleeves rolled up, looking far too relaxed for someone about to talk business. "Morning, Dad," Claire said, patting the couch beside her. "We've been looking into some options for you, ways to make life easier." I didn't sit. Instead, I took my coffee from the kitchen counter and stood in the doorway. "Life's already easy," I said, blowing on the steam. Darren leaned forward, folding his hands. "We've been researching a few retirement communities. Great amenities, medical staff on site, lots of activities. You'd be around people your age and away from people your family's age." I interrupted, my tone dry. Claire's smile flickered, but she pressed on. "It's just that this house is a lot to keep up with. The yard work, the repairs, the utilities. And honestly, Dad, it's not safe for you to be climbing ladders or shoveling snow anymore." I took a slow sip, letting the quiet stretch before answering. "I built this place. Every board, every nail. I know it better than anyone. If something needs fixing, I can fix it." They exchanged one of those quick glances that says more than words, the kind that confirms they'd rehearsed this conversation long before I walked in. Darren slid a glossy brochure across the table. "Just take a look. The units are spacious, and the buy-in would be completely covered if we repurpose this property." "Repurpose," I repeated. "That what we're calling it now?" Claire sighed, like I was the unreasonable one. "This is an opportunity, Dad. You'd have a smaller, easier place, and we could put the equity from this house into something more productive." "For who?" I asked. Neither of them answered. At that moment, Max wandered in, rubbing his eyes. "Grandpa, are we still going to the park today?" "Not today, sweetheart," Claire said quickly. "Grandpa's busy." I crouched to Max's level, ignoring her. "We'll go tomorrow," I promised. He smiled faintly before shuffling off toward the kitchen. I turned back to his parents. "I'll think about it," I said, knowing full well my decision was already made. The moment they left for the day, I pulled out my phone and called my lawyer. "It's time," I told him. "Let's set the date." That afternoon, I walked the property's perimeter, not to look for repairs, but to take stock of memories. The back porch where Evelyn and I drank coffee on warm summer mornings. The oak tree we planted the year Claire was born, now towering high enough to shade half the yard. The worn mark on the garage wall from when Max learned to ride his bike. They saw square footage and market value. I saw a lifetime. Over the next few days, Claire's tone shifted. She was suddenly sweeter, more attentive, the kind of politeness that has an agenda. She brought me coffee in the mornings, asked if I'd slept well, even made my favorite soup one evening. The timing was too perfect to be genuine. On Thursday, while she was at work and Darren was out, a knock came at the front door. When I opened it, a man in a blazer stood there holding a clipboard. "Here to do the appraisal," he said. "Appraisal for what?" I asked. He hesitated. "The upcoming sale." I stepped back just enough to let my words carry weight. "There's no sale," and I closed the door. The moment he was gone, I called Claire. She picked up on the second ring, her voice overly casual. "Oh, Dad, that must have been a mix-up. I'll take care of it." She didn't apologize. That night, I heard them arguing in the kitchen after they thought I'd gone to bed. Words like deadline and buyer drifted up the stairs. Darren's tone was sharp, Claire's defensive. By the weekend, I decided it was time to quietly escalate my side of things. I spent hours in the attic sorting through boxes Evelyn and I had packed away decades ago. old photo albums, holiday decorations, and tucked deep inside one box, the ledger from my contracting business. Page after page of careful records, notes on jobs that no one else knew about, side projects that funded Max's early school tuition, the vacations Evelyn cherished, and most importantly, the final payments on this house. They also funded something Claire and Darren had no idea existed, a private account in my name at a bank they didn't know. The balance wasn't enormous, but it was enough to make moves without their permission. That same afternoon, I drove to the bank in person. The manager was a man I'd known since he was a young teller. We talked behind the closed door of his office. When I left, I had a safe deposit box registered solely in my name, containing duplicates of every critical document tied to this property: the trust papers, the deed, Evelyn's handwritten notes. When I pulled into the driveway, Claire was outside talking to a woman with a notepad and measuring tape. Their conversation stopped the moment I approached. "This is just a friend," Claire said quickly. "She's into home design." I nodded as if I believed her. In truth, I had just confirmed exactly how close they thought they were to winning. That evening, Max wandered into the garage while I was tightening a loose hinge on an old tool chest. "Grandpa," he said, hesitating in the doorway, "Mum told me we might move. She says you'll have a new place and we'll visit you there." I set the screwdriver down and looked him in the eye. "Did she now?" He bit his lip. "I don't want to visit, I want you here." I crouched so we were eye level. "Sometimes people make plans without asking the right questions, Max. But here's the thing, plans can change." He studied my face for a long moment before nodding slowly, as though deciding he could trust me. The rest of the week became a balancing act, acting as though I didn't know what was coming, while making sure every protective measure was in place. I met with my lawyer again, finalizing paperwork Evelyn had started years before she passed. Her foresight was the backbone of everything I was about to do. By Sunday, Claire's patience was thinning. At breakfast, she finally said it outright. "Dad, we can't keep dragging this out. There's an offer on the table, and it's good. We should take it." I looked her straight in the eye. "And what if I say no?" She set her fork down harder than necessary. "Then you're making a mistake." Darren leaned forward, his voice sharp. "You're not thinking long-term here, Walt. This is about security, for all of us." "I already have security," I replied evenly. "You just don't know where it is." Claire frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" I didn't answer. Some things are better left to stew. That Monday morning the kitchen felt colder than usual. Claire was already dressed for work, her heels clicking sharply against the tile. Darren trailed behind her, scrolling on his phone. They weren't speaking to each other, which was interesting in itself. "There's an open house later this week," Claire said without looking at me. "For a place I think you should see. Smaller, newer, all one floor. Perfect for you." "I'll pass," I said. Her lips tightened. "Dad, this isn't optional. We can't have you rattling around in this old place forever." I leaned back in my chair. "You say rattling around like I'm a ghost." She flinched just slightly, but recovered quickly. "You're twisting my words." Darren cleared his throat. "It's practical, Walt. The market's good right now. Sell high, buy something manageable." "And where would you live?" I asked. Claire hesitated before saying, "We'd figure that out." I just smiled faintly. I'd already figured it out for them, and they weren't going to like the answer. Later that afternoon, I went into the study. Evelyn's old desk still sat in the corner, polished smooth by years of her hands. In the top drawer, right where I'd left it, was a thick manila envelope. Inside were copies of our wills, the deed to the house, and most importantly, the amendments we made after Claire married Darren. Those amendments had removed Claire as the sole beneficiary, placing the property into a living trust with conditions she wouldn't want to hear about until it was too late. I traced my fingers over Evelyn's handwriting in the margins. She had a gift for thinking 3 moves ahead. Years ago, she'd told me gently, without malice, that one day Claire might see the house as an asset before she saw it as a home. I hadn't wanted to believe her. Now I knew better. That evening, Max came running into the backyard, a battered football tucked under his arm. "Can we throw it around, Grandpa?" We did. I underhanded it to him carefully, making sure not to strain my knee. Between throws, he told me about school, about a science project he was working on, and about how his mum said they might take a big trip this summer. "Where to?" I asked. He shrugged. "Somewhere with a beach. She said it depends on selling the house." I caught the ball and held it for a moment. "And how do you feel about that?" He shrugged again, but his eyes drifted toward the house. "I like it here. My room smells like summer, even in winter." That night, when the house was quiet, I opened the filing cabinet in the basement. Most of it was just old tax records and appliance manuals, but in the bottom drawer I found something useful, the original appraisal from when Evelyn and I first bought the house. The number was laughably low compared to today's market value, but it was proof of something vital. The equity here belonged to us, not to Claire, not to Darren. The next morning I visited my lawyer again. I want to add a clause to the trust, I told him. He raised an eyebrow. What kind of clause? If the house is ever sold during my lifetime, the proceeds go into a restricted account for Max, not a cent to Claire or Darren. That's going to make for a difficult conversation later, he said. I'm not looking for conversation, I replied. I'm looking for protection. By lunchtime, the paperwork was signed and filed. The paper trail was airtight. When I returned home, Claire was waiting in the hallway. Where have you been? Out, I said. With who? An old friend. She studied my face, trying to read something there. Dad, you're not doing anything stupid, are you? Define stupid, I said, walking past her. That evening, Darren suggested we all have dinner together, something we rarely did anymore. Halfway through the meal, he leaned back in his chair and began his pitch. A buddy of mine just retired after selling his place. He's traveling now. No stress about maintenance, no family drama. You could have that, Walt. Claire jumped in almost on cue. Exactly. You could relax, live a little. I set my fork down and met their eyes. I am living. This is my version. Darren forced a laugh, but I caught the way his fingers tightened around his wine glass. Claire just gave me that look, the one that measured how hard she'd have to push to get what she wanted. The next morning I made a deliberate move. I called a handyman to come by and fix the little things Claire had been complaining about for months. A loose step on the porch, a dripping faucet in the upstairs bathroom, the squeaky cabinet hinge in the kitchen. By late afternoon, every so-called problem was gone. When she came home, Claire glanced around, noticing. Trying to make the house unsellable, she asked, her voice sharp. Just taking care of what's mine, I replied. Friday night, I set my first real trap. I left a copy of the original trust document, not the updated one, on my desk, positioned so it was clearly visible from the hallway. That night I heard Claire's footsteps pause outside the study, then the faint rustle of paper. I smiled to myself in the dark. Saturday morning she was unusually cheerful. Dad, I've been thinking, maybe we could all take a trip this spring. You, me, Darren, Max, somewhere warm. It was bait. Get me out of the house long enough for them to do whatever they'd been planning. Sounds nice, I said. Let me think about it. That afternoon, Max found me in the garage. Mum told me to make sure you're free the first week of April. She said it's important. I slipped him a 20 for new cleats and told him thanks. He grinned, but his eyes were worried. By Sunday, I knew exactly what was coming. They'd use the trip to push paperwork, maybe even change the locks. What they didn't know was that the moment I stepped out the door, the safe deposit box, the lawyer's files, and the amended trust would make their entire plan worthless. Still, I wasn't ready to end the game, because the best part of any game is watching the other side realize they've already lost. It was a Tuesday evening when Claire made her move. I had just finished rinsing my dinner plate when she appeared in the doorway, her smile just a shade too bright. Dad, guess what? Darren and I booked that trip we were talking about. First week of April, Florida, warm beaches, fresh air. You'll love it. I dried my hands slowly, letting the silence stretch before I spoke. You've already booked it. Non-refundable, she said, still smiling. We even asked the neighbor to check in on the house while we're gone. That was the tell. If we were all going, why would the neighbor need to check in? I nodded like I believed her. That's thoughtful. The days leading up to the trip were full of subtle maneuvers. Claire started fussing over my clothes, talking about packing light. Darren mentioned renting a big enough car for all of us, as if my participation was already locked in. One night I caught Claire on the phone in the hallway. Her back was to me, but I could hear her voice, low and certain. Yes, first week of April. No, he doesn't suspect a thing. We'll have the papers ready by then. The next morning I took a detour into town and stopped by my lawyer's office without an appointment. Change of plans, I told him. I want to transfer from my primary account into a separate one, sole beneficiary Max, and I want it to happen while I'm out of state. He adjusted his glasses. You're sure? I'm certain, I said. Think of it as moving valuables before a storm. That weekend, Max and I were in the garage cleaning out old fishing gear when he asked, Grandpa, do you want to go on this trip? What makes you ask that? I said, Mum's been acting different. Nicer, but it feels fake, like she's keeping you happy until something. I smiled. You've got good instincts, Max. Never ignore them. He hesitated before adding, I heard Dad tell her to make sure you're packed and ready, like it was important. I nodded slowly. Don't worry, kid, I'll be ready. The week before departure, Claire placed a printed itinerary on the kitchen table. Flight details, hotel bookings, even daily activities were listed, but there was one curious omission. No return flight for me. When I asked about it, she waved her hand. Must be a typo. I'll fix it. She didn't fix it. That night, I took out my old leather notebook and made my final adjustments, moved the safe deposit box keys to my jacket pocket, asked Mr. Lawson, the neighbor, to ignore any requests from Claire or Darren to enter my property, installed 2 security cameras, both motion-triggered, both sending footage to an off-site server. By the time I closed the notebook, the plan felt airtight. The next few weeks unfolded like a slow-burning fuse, each day bringing me closer to the moment I had been quietly building toward. My lawyer, Peter Langston, was meticulous. Every email, every signed document, and every financial transaction was catalogued, cross-checked and filed in a folder so thick it could have been mistaken for an encyclopedia. We didn't need theatrics, we needed precision, and Peter knew that better than anyone. Meanwhile, I kept up appearances. I still visited the same diner on Main Street, still waved to the neighbors, and still greeted David, my brother, with the same neutral smile whenever we crossed paths. He thought I had finally accepted my loss, and I was more than happy to let him believe it. Sometimes the best revenge is patience disguised as defeat. On the surface, the family was moving on. David was busy parading around the estate, hosting dinners and luncheons for his circle of friends, bragging about finally taking responsibility for the family's assets. I heard about these gatherings from the townsfolk, some with sympathy in their eyes, others just curious about the feud they sensed but couldn't quite piece together. Every rumor and whisper only fed the anticipation for what was coming. One afternoon, while reviewing documents with Peter in his office, we finalized the date for the county court hearing. This is airtight, Peter said, tapping the stack of evidence with his pen. He's not just going to lose the case, he's going to lose his standing in this town. The certainty in his voice gave me a rare moment of calm. That night, I sat alone on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun sink below the horizon. The house, quiet and unassuming, had been my sanctuary through all of this. I thought about my father's voice, the one that used to remind me that real strength isn't loud, it's steady. I smiled to myself, because in just a short while, my steadiness would turn into something my brother could never ignore.